sometimes a nice formula works well on your way to the greatest of all time. The same goes for your copy, especially for your subject lines. Nothing worse than writing a great email and then getting stuck on the subject line. That's why for the very first time, I'm breaking down my 3 formulas for scroll stopping subject lines during my latest podcast interview, because you're one step closer to people buying from you if they open your email. And then I gave them the details of where they could go and listen to the podcast. That's like an example of the Story Stripdown in action.
Hey, it's Renee. Welcome to the Into the Wild Show, the podcast for women who want to build incredible mental strength to level up their business and lifestyle. I'm Renee Warren, the founder of We Wild Women, author, speaker, award-winning entrepreneur, and your host. Together, we will make you unapologetic about shining your light, growing your business, and turning you into a wildly confident and successful leader. This is for you, the visionary, the go-getter, the entrepreneur, and for those that need a real kick in the butt to get going and to dream bigger. Each week, I bring in leading experts and entrepreneurs to help you take leaps in the right direction, because I know the best advice comes from someone who has successfully done it before. So, are you ready to level up? Welcome to Into the Wild. Hey, you wild women. My next guest is a copywriting genius. Believe me, she did some raw, impromptu copywriting storytelling while I was interviewing her. In addition to writing the words that get landing pages converting at 60% or higher and crafting personality-filled emails, she helps coaches and creatives craft their uncopyable, if that's even a word, messages inside her signature program called the Copy Confidence Society. She's also the creator of the wildly popular summit, the Copy Chat, which has raised over $100,000 for organizations like Soul Fire Farm, the Headstrong Project, and Sage USA. When not clacking on her laptop and her all-American road trip this year, you can find this Harvard grad analyzing Real Housewives episodes like it's government policy and consuming inappropriate amounts of nutritious candy bars. Oh my gosh, I'm totally butchering what that is. Anyway, in this episode, Marisa and I chat about, I don't want to say the simple, but the really cool things you can do to more easily start crafting stories for your emails, for podcasts, for your bio, for social media. She comes up with these 3 R's. She explains closer to the end of the episode, and really some really cool tips and ways to craft your story so that it's not something that takes you hours to do. And she actually reads some of the emails that she's written in the past and why she believes the story of her grandfather should be a tax deduction. Anyways, please join us on this incredible conversation. All right, please welcome the incredible Marisa Corcoran.
Hi, Renee. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining me. You were late starting because of a couple puppy incidents this morning.
Yeah. Yes, that's okay. I feel like we got to know each other like so well just from like, I was like, what kind of puppy do you have? And oh, your kids are on spring break or like, or they don't have school today. And like, I actually always love those conversations before you even like hit record. I love it. So I love hearing about it. It's
like a whole life happened before we pressed record.
Totally. I feel like we talked about so much.
Yeah, and how I was wearing almost the same outfit as you yesterday.
I know. We were like twinning. We were talking about like, our families, dogs, where we are in the country, like spring break, all of it.
Yeah. So my kids just did 2 weeks spring break to come back into their first week of school. That is a short week because this week and next week are short because of Easter.
Yeah. I was going to ask you because you're like, oh, they don't have school today. And I'm like, oh, is it still spring break? That feels like 3 weeks. I mean, I would have been so excited as a kid to have 3 weeks.
Well, in BC, it's 2 weeks here.
Oh,
and I remember only having one week where I grew up.
Only had one.
I know. I was like, I remember the first time because it was like one of my youngest goes to a private outdoor school. So when we got the school calendar, I was like, oh, this is what they do in private school. And no, it's actually the province. So I'm like, oh, got it. I want 2 weeks spring break.
I went to Catholic school. So if it lined up, like with Easter, we get a lot of time. We didn't like go to school on Holy Thursday or Good Friday. So like we used to get like extra days off because I went to Catholic school,
Yeah.
And then I got to be an adult and realized like that wasn't everywhere. And I was like, wait, I have to do things on
Yeah.
Holy Thursday.
I remember being sick at school and my dad would come pick me up middle of the day. And I'm like, there's cars on the road? Aren't people supposed to be at school or at work? What are people doing outside of the buildings? I don't get this.
I know. When you realize like there's a whole other world like outside of how you like grew up or what you knew, like,
exactly.
Being in school or whatever. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what's going on in your life right now.
Yeah. So I'm Marisa Corcoran. And in like my business world, we support people. People always say that like, oh, copy is something that, maybe I'll look at later. Like, let me get my sales or let me get my lead generation on point. And people, kind of consider copy to be the icing on the cake. And I always say like, no, it is the cake. It's the butter. If you're gluten-free like me, it's the gluten-free flour. It's the eggs. It's like, if you want to sell in a way that feels good, you want to call in the right people to sell to, then you have to know what to say and how to say it so that those two things can happen. And that's what we support people to do. We help you create your uncopyable message and the copy that supports it inside of our signature program called the Copy Confidence Society. And then, which is really so exciting is that like in my personal life, which also is in with the business, we're on an all-American road trip this year. We left Atlanta that we've been in for 5 years, put all our stuff in storage, and we are traveling the country. And I'm getting to meet a lot of the people that have been in our community for the very first time in real life. So it's been really special to like see parts of the country that we've always wanted to see and also meet people who've, helped me build what we've built and like hug people in real life. So
what made you guys decide to do that?
Yeah, Renee, it's such a good question. We always wanted to do it. It was something that we've had planned for about 8 years. And it's so funny because I didn't even remember, but I had created a Pinterest board. Like I used to be really into my Pinterest boards. And I had like a Pinterest cross-country adventure and I totally forgot about it until about 2 weeks ago. We were going to New Orleans and I was like, well, let me see on Pinterest. Sometimes they have those cool like 12 things to do if you have one day or whatever. And I saw that I had this Pinterest board, cross-country adventure. And I opened it up and I was so excited because I realized so much of what I had originally envisioned were actually going to those places. But it's something we always wanted to do. We were supposed to do it the year of our wedding. And that was back before we had the business. And my husband lost his job that year and we weren't able to like afford our contribution to the wedding and do this. Then we moved to Atlanta and we said, okay, we'll stay in Atlanta for about a year or two and then we'll go do the trip. We'll save up and do the trip. And then the pandemic happened, so we couldn't do it. And then last summer we were like, well, maybe we'll do it like mini. We'll go away for like a month or two, we'll come back. And then last summer, unfortunately, I'm totally okay at the moment, but I was diagnosed with breast cancer last summer. So we couldn't go. And then when I got my clear scans, it was this weird moment where I kind of walked out and looked at my husband like thumbs up, like my scans are clear because they tell you that day.
It must be an American thing. I feel like in Canada, it's a whole event.
I mean, it was a whole event, but that day for my scans, they were like, we're going to tell you today, which I didn't realize. And then they have you go back out in the gown, you know what I mean? Then they have me come back in. And they said, okay, you can take a seat. We're going to talk about your results. And I was like, I remember being like, no, I don't need to take a seat. I'm good.
Oh my God.
And they were like, your scans are clear.
Oh,
you're good.
I couldn't imagine.
We'll see you in 6 months. And I just started sobbing. I was like, I'm good. And then I walked down, kind of gave a thumbs up to my husband because he was out there. And then we looked at each other and it was just like this joint, let's do the sigh of relief and like, let's do the trip. Yeah, I have to go back in 6 months. So we were like, let's go do the trip. And we just like put all our stuff in storage and we just did it. So I feel like it's like an 8-year thing in the making that's finally happening.
Yay. Well, good for you. Unfortunate speed bump on the way, but you did it. We do a version of it where prior to the pandemic, we would go to San Diego because we used to live on the East Coast of Canada. And for 2, 3, 4 months, we'd pack our kids up and whatever we could fit into one suitcase each. And we'd just go. And it was awesome. We'd rented an Airbnb and we would just figure it out when we got there. We actually did a trip in Spain and Portugal for 2.5 weeks in the fall so my boys are 9 and 10, so it's a lot easier to travel. But the only place we had booked was when we landed for 2 nights in Madrid. And then we spent 2 weeks just literally driving on the highway and Airbnb-ing the next available place along the way.
That's so cool.
It was a lot, but it was so cool. It's one of those things where you dream about it, but you never do it. And then once you're in it, you're like, why did it take us so long to do this?
Yeah. And that's something your kids will remember forever.
Oh yeah.
They'll just think they'll be somewhere like 20 years from now. Like, yeah, my parents, people will be like, wow, your parents were are the coolest people ever.
Well, I mean,
that's awesome.
not this morning, what they received in me yelling at them because the dog peed all over the floor. But I remember when we got to Spain, it was Halloween weekend and they celebrate like Day of the Dead. And they love to party late. So we didn't know this, but where our Airbnb was 2 floors above a nightclub. So all night long till 5 a.m., the building was shaking. And my kids are like, I can't sleep. I'm like, how about we just go to sleep when everybody else does?
Yes. Yeah,
we'll just stay up all night long.
This is cool. Kids, this is what you call an all-nighter.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
But that's cool that you guys got to do that. And I'm sure like meeting your clients in person and just being in a different city, like the cities you're going to are so cool.
Yeah, it's been awesome so far. Like we started in Florida and we'd been the places there. But once we left Florida, like we'd never been to New Orleans, where we are right now. At the time of this recording, we're in Austin. We'd never been to Austin. And like from here on out, we really haven't been to any of the places that we're going to. I've been to the Pacific Northwest, to Seattle one time for a wedding. But that's it. Other than that, all these places, this is new for both of us.
And where are you from?
We're from Syracuse, New York, upstate New York.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And we lived in New York City, between New York City and Boston for about 10 years, like back and forth. And then moved to Atlanta about 5 years ago. Yeah. But we're from upstate originally.
Oh, it's funny because I'm from Canada and I've been to all those cities.
I know. When you said East Coast, I was like, wait, where were you from on the East Coast?
New Brunswick.
Oh, okay.
So that's like east of Maine. Yeah. So closer to you. Okay. So then I want to get into the juicy bits about copy and all the stuff that you are really good at. And I have a couple of questions for you, of which you have some really cool concepts and methods. But first, because this relates to what I do in PR and what you do with copy too, is storytelling. And explain from your perspective, why is it so important?
Okay. There's a couple reasons. So first off, storytelling is our oldest form of communication. Like it dates back to the Chauvet Caves, like 30,000 years ago. This is our oldest form of communication. And there are multiple studies that show, and I'll probably butcher how I say this because I'm not like the science. I say there's multiple studies that show, and then I'm going to totally butcher it. But, studies that show that there's these parts of the brain that light up when you are receiving information through a story, as opposed to just receiving kind of the facts and figures. That we are hardwired to pay attention when a story is kind of at the forefront, as opposed to kind of climbing on a soapbox and like giving a teachable moment. And if we think about some of our like greatest leaders of all time, these are people who have been really incredible storytellers. We're doing this recording at the time of Easter, and like Jesus is a great example of this. Like he wasn't telling people like, hey, be nice, like, hey, you can mess up and like, God will still love you. He tells the story of the prodigal son. He was using storytelling. Like Jesus was a pretty phenomenal marketer. Like, and so like the storytelling aspect, like it works. And also when we think about people making purchasing decisions, we have to remember that people make purchasing decisions based on 2 things. One is what you're selling, something that I want or I need. That's your message. That's like your positioning. And number 2, are you the person that I want to do it with? And that's where the storytelling really comes in. Do I get a sense of your voice, your vibe, your values? Especially if you think you're kind of in a saturated market, this is where when you really tap in to these stories, these kind of slice of life moments that you can tell, there really becomes, and this is going to sound a little like kumbaya, but I really believe it, there becomes no such thing as competition. There can only be collaboration. And storytelling helps you do that.
It reminds me of what David Meltzer once said, is he doesn't believe in competition, he believes in completion. If you can help somebody complete something, regardless of them being a competitor, it's a game changer for you. And like even in my space, I think there's so many people in PR, and I subscribe to their newsletters and I follow them and I share their stuff. And to most people, it's like, well, that's absurd that you would do that with your competitors. And I'm like, but these people, they can't actually service every single person out there. And so just by showing that support, there's going to be moments where like they don't have the capacity for a client, but they'll refer somebody to me. So like, anyways, it reminds me of of that. And even in storytelling, so I think of storytelling from a PR perspective is like in the pitches. It's like, why is this product or service important to the publication or the podcast host of which we're pitching? But what exactly do you mean by storytelling?
My favorite place to tell stories is in my emails. I absolutely love my email readers. I love my email list. I just love the connection that I've been able to create in there. So I send an email to my list. I send 2 a week. And we also do like a monthly roundup called the Sunday series. And also like if maybe you're launching a product or a course or your service, like there's a bunch of emails that you have to send. Like we have to send more emails than we think. People will miss it, or like different buyer styles need different things. So instead of just keep saying, hey, my course is open, or just like, whatever's happening, you use stories to kind of create that connection with your audience. And so I'm always trying to use stories inside of my emails and in my social posts, like in my Instagram or inside of our Facebook group called the Copy Chat Facebook group. And that's where I'm positioning my stories, as opposed to just telling a teachable moment about, why you need copy in your business, or why you need such and such, or, hey, the doors are open, giving kind of different. And I think sometimes when people think of stories, they think it has to be like this. You have to have like this giant origin story you're telling all the time. And what I'm talking about here is like these small kind of like slice of life moments that really start to create that connection with your audience and foster engagement, people hitting reply to your emails. And even if they don't, this is also interesting, not to take like a tangent, but I remember the first time I ever launched the Copy Confidence Society. This is back when I took calls for it. All these people booked calls and I didn't know who they were, Renee. Like they weren't people who were responding to the emails. I'm like, who are these people? And when I got on calls with them, I was like, well, how did you know this was right for you? And they said, well, I read all your emails and I feel like I know you. I feel like I have a connection to you, your dog, Jake, your former life as an actor, your grandfather, your struggle with acne. And I feel like I can trust you and I want to create that. And I thought it was interesting, Renee, because these were people that had never responded to the emails. So we're also not just talking about the vanity metrics of like, of course that matters, response, engagement, open rates, all of that, but that people are kind of clocking you in the background you don't even know. So our goal here through the stories is that I always say the 3 R's, that people remember you, that they rave about you, and that they refer you in some way.
Oh, I love that. And it's true because people do business with those they know, like, and trust.
Yep.
And what better way to know somebody and like them is through their stories.
Yeah.
And so what would be an example of something that you did recently that was like a really good story, whether it was like in your group or in a newsletter?
A really good story. Okay. Oh my God, I'm telling stories all the time. But a recent one is actually about my grandfather. So the community absolutely loves my grandfather. He appears in the welcome sequence for the very first time. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed away 2 summers ago. He was almost 99 years old, so he lived the most incredible life, and he was an absolute gem of a human being. And I'm so lucky I had him in my life for until my late 30s, as long as I did, and we were incredibly close. But I told this story recently about a few years ago. He was invited to a birthday party for a friend of his that was turning 100 years old. And it required us to go back to the community where he used to live with my grandmother. But he didn't know if he wanted to go back because it's just those memories of my grandma. My grandma died about 11, 12 years ago. And he didn't know if he wanted to go back, or like he hadn't been there in a couple of years. He lived in a new place now. And I said, come on, let's just like go for a few minutes. Like Philomena wants to see you. Like, come on, she's turning 100. We're going. Okay, we're going to grab a piece of cake. We're going to rock. We're going to go. And when we walked in, I will never forget, Renee, it was like he was Dottie Hinson in That League of Their Own, when like the older Gina Davis character like walks into the Baseball Hall of Fame and people were like, oh my God, they were like, Frank is here. And they're like, oh my gosh, Frank, hi, hello. And they're like, how are you? And my grandpa always had this thing. If you said, how are you? He'd say, I are fine. That was like his response. And people were like, throwing their walkers aside. They're like, oh my gosh, Frank is here. And there was a newer person that worked there. And I'll never forget, that person goes, oh, who is that? Like, I don't know who that is. And this other person that's worked there forever, this guy, Nick, he goes, oh my God, you don't know Frank? He's a legend around here. And I told this story about how, you have that power to be a legend inside of your business when you create these kinds of connections. And I linked it back to something else that we do inside of the business where I help you build and create your own stage with a signature summit. And I talked about how a signature summit fosters that kind of way that people consider you legend because of the connections that the way that we teach summits allow you to do that other things may not. And people loved it. People were responding, whether it was about my grandpa or about like, hey, tell me more about, oh my gosh, you're bringing back the Signature Summit VIP days. Let me know. But it was a way to talk about how powerful summits can be without just like saying that. And that email just went out like a couple of days ago, I think. Yeah.
And there's stories in everything too. And people I don't have a story to share. You're right about it. People thinking it always has to be their origin story or like the biggest trauma that you've ever faced or like some massive failure. But there's always those like, as you say, little slices of life. I love that. Even like my story about the puppy peeing all over the place before a call and I was like frazzled is a story because in it there was a lesson learned. And it's like the lesson learned was we need to have more structure around device and iPad time for our boys, especially when they're on call with the dog, right? There's this new thing in our life and now we have to teach these boys this lesson. So it is content. And now I'm sharing it in a podcast.
100%. It could be an email. This could be a social post. You know what I mean? And it can link back to your audience in some way. And sometimes it doesn't. Like this one time I told this story about this guy my grandpa used to drive to church. It doesn't actually link back to my audience in any way. And I said that, like, why am I sharing this with you? I always call it like the non-sexy transition. Sometimes you tell the story and then you can just say, hey, when this happened, I thought about you. Or why am I telling you this? Or, hey, when you sign up for this with me, it's going to be even better than this. Like these little non-sexy transitions. But in that one, this story about this guy my grandpa used to pick up for church, I just said, why am I sharing this with you? No reason. I wanted to make you laugh today. I hope that I did, like XOM. It was like a Friday email that went out. So I think I'm pretty good at spinning anything back to the audience. I do this a lot inside of the society where people will bring these and say, well, how does this connect back to your audience? And I'm like, I got you covered there. But it's also okay sometimes if it doesn't, because again, that second purchasing decision, are you the person that I want to do it with? So sometimes just like these little moments of seeing you help people make decisions of like, oh, hey, Renee, I'm thinking about, who I want to go to for, PR or working with. It's like, oh, you know what? I really feel this connection to Renee. So I feel like there's so many ways we can use the stories.
Because people remember the stories about the person and not necessarily the lesson, right? Yeah. So like now you're like, do people even know what your grandfather did? What he did for a living, right? Maybe they do through your story, but they just know how great of a person he was by way of those stories.
I used to joke with him that he should have been a tax write-off. I was like, Grandpa, you've helped me make a lot of money. People love you. You know what I mean?
That's
my dog
a good
Jake
one
too. Yeah.
How to make your grandfather a tax write-off. There's a course for you.
He was. And that's why there's this story I always used to tell about him that was called the banana milkshakes business model. That's what the subject line is. And it's about my grandfather and I when we were younger, and my grandma would go on these retreats and my mom would be doing something at church. I can't remember. And I would just be me and my grandpa. We'd make these, he didn't know how to cook. So that was our time to just like eat whatever we wanted. We'd eat these banana milkshakes and like sit and watch TV. And it was like this time together. And as we got older now, it was me making the milkshake, not so much him. Mm. And this is an email I sent out that a few years ago was listed, and like a few different people had reached out to me and said, I want to include you in like a top email of the year roundup. Mm. And every single person, I think it was like 3 or 4 that year, and all the people, Renee, wanted the banana milkshakes business model email. So that's why it ended up in my, now it's in my welcome sequence. So you meet my grandfather in like email 5 of the welcome sequence, and people love it. So there's also stories that you can tell that if they really connect, you can save them for things like a welcome sequence, or maybe it appears on a sales page or in another place. But we don't know that unless you get out and start telling those stories, like what resonates.
Okay, so do you have like a sneaky procedure in where you store these stories, or as they're happening? Like, how do you know something's going to be good? What's your process?
Yeah, my gosh. Okay, you don't. But, okay, so there's 2 things. And I know we're going to talk about the Story Stripdown, which is one of the ways to do this. But I have decided that everything, like you just said, Renee, anything can be a story. So a lot of times when you're doing your business, like this requires you to take off your marketing hat and like put on your creative hat for a little bit and just really think of things in that way. So if Eric and I, my husband, are having a conversation, we're standing in line at Target, something's happened. I'm like, ooh, this could be a story. And I just have a thing in my phone that says like, Target paper towel moment. I may not know exactly when it will appear, when I might use it, but I kind of keep that list. And when we used to be in Atlanta, we had a chalkboard wall. And sometimes I would just say to Eric, write Billy Joel hit River of Dreams on the chalkboard wall. Like I knew what it meant, which was that this thing where I realized that Billy Joel hasn't written a new song since the mid 90s. And he's still selling out. Right. So like repeat your content, repurpose.
Oh, the good
stuff. That was kind of the link.
Oh, I love that. Repeat the good stuff.
But I just wrote to Eric, repeat the good stuff, like Billy Joel. I was like, Eric, write Billy Joel, River of Dreams, like on the chalkboard wall. And sometimes people would come over to our apartment and there'd just be like, Billy Joel, River, like on the chalkboard wall, So I don't necessarily know exactly how I'll use it, but I start to think of things like that. And then that's where this other thing that we can talk about, which is the story Stripdown, which is a way to kind of reverse engineer, because I know that people can say, okay, Marisa, I get that, but what if I truly like can't think of a story? Like what's another way for me to do this? And that's why I created the story Stripdown, to kind of reverse engineer it for when you need it.
Okay, I love it. So, while we're on that topic, explain to us, what is the story Stripdown?
Getting my hoops ready. No,
yeah, so the big, gorgeous earring hoops.
Earlier I was on a call with a good friend of mine, Sage, and I was just like so excited about something she was saying. And, I'm Italian, so I talk with my hands. And I went like this. I pulled my own hoop out of my ear. It was totally fine. It just fell on the ground. And I was like, tell me you're Italian without telling me you're Italian. I pulled out my own hoop while, having a passionate conversation with a good friend of mine about something we're excited about.
I could see that. I feel like the Italians and the French do that a lot. I'm
totally.
Like kind of French, but I've done that before with hoops, but only brushing my hair. And it's like, cause it's just like a loose back. So the thing just kind of flew across the room, but I was like, oh my God, is my earlobe still connected to
that's what I thought. I'm like, is my earlobe, am I like bleeding on this conversation? Okay. So for the story Stripdown, so I'll kind of run you through and then I can give you an example and then we'll go from there. So when we think about the story Stripdown, we first want to actually think about what the takeaway might be. So in your niche or your industry, we talk about in the Copy Confidence Society, like having these motifs or these pillars, like these kind of teachable moments that if you talk about again and again, your audience gets to know you for those things. So we want to start with like a teachable moment or a motif or whatever the takeaway is that you want them to do. And this will make more sense when I give you the example, but we want to start with the takeaway. Then we want to ask ourselves in the next box, okay, what is like stopping for people from just doing that thing that you want them to do? Like what's in the way of that? And then what's the feeling that describes that? And then the next box is, when have you ever, or someone in your life, doesn't have to be you, when have you ever felt this way? And this is what's interesting, is that most of the time want to think of a story that maybe isn't like within your niche, because usually like maybe you're an expert at this point. We want to like think of another like angle, kind of like me telling that story about my grandfather, like in another way. And then that's kind of how we put the story together. So to give you an example, a couple of years ago, I was premiering this new lead magnet that I had called the 50+ scroll stopping subject lines. And I was premiering it on a friend of mine on her podcast. And I didn't want to just write the email of like, yeah, there's a new podcast out, go listen to it. Like we all need subject lines. So I knew that the takeaway was that I wanted people to go listen to the interview and I wanted them to understand the importance of your subject line for your emails. And so like what's in the way of people just picking a subject line and doing it is kind of like overwhelm. You don't know if this subject is it too many characters? Should I use emojis or not? How do I know? Do I go with something like sexy and mysterious or straightforward? And so the feeling underneath that is like sometimes just like that overwhelm of choice. How do I know if I'm making the right decision? And so then I had to sit with myself and go, okay, when have I ever felt like that? And then, and this is where we got to like put our creative hat on, maybe go look at your list of stories that you have or take a minute. And this is where I actually remember this conversation I'd had with my mother-in-law. So my in-laws were, when all of their friends were downsizing and like moving to Florida, my mother-in-law built her dream home. And their kitchen is unbelievable. And I'll never forget the first time I walked in there. I felt like I was in a Joanna Gaines, like a fixer-upper. Joe and Chip were going to pop out of the shiplap. I was like, what is this kitchen? So my mother-in-law, I'm like, Rachel, how did you figure this out? Like, how did you do this? And she said, it was really overwhelming at first, but then like the contract, they gave me a couple of choices of what the kitchen could look like. I picked the one that felt like me, and then we kind of customized from there. And I remembered this story, and I was like, oh, this is the story. So the email that I ended up sending was me talking about and me basically saying, it's official. Like, my in-laws have a goat kitchen, the greatest of all time. And I kind of described it. So they have these light cabinets, equal parts, brand new / I've lived here for 100 years, a deep farmhouse sink, an island the size of a small southern county. And every time I pour my Califia oat milk creamer into my Earl Grey tea in that paradise, I think, wow, my in-laws are ballers. And I remember asking my mother-in-law, Rachel, how did you even design this kitchen? And she says, it was overwhelming, but they presented me with a few layouts. And once I picked one, I could customize. And then I said, sometimes a nice formula works well on your way to the greatest of all time. The same goes for your copy, especially for your subject lines. Nothing worse than writing a great email and then getting stuck on the subject line. That's why for the very first time, I'm breaking down my 3 formulas for scroll stopping subject lines during my latest podcast interview, because you're one step closer to people buying from you if they open your email. And then I gave them the details of where they could go and listen to the podcast. That's like an example of the Story Stripdown in action.
That is so huge and overlaps so much in the PR world too, because you can have the most perfect pitch. And I've spent hours writing a 1-paragraph pitch to a journalist, and I got stuck on the subject line. And I would let it sit there for days because I'm like, what's going to get this person to open it?
So, and we had people go and listen to the episode and like so excited, and people that were hitting reply about like, oh my gosh, I want to see a picture of your mother-in-law's kitchen. And then I could reply back and be like, oh my gosh, let me ask her if I can. Also, have you gone and listened to the episode? Like, there were these ways to follow up with people as opposed to just sending this email about like, hey, I have a new podcast that's live or something that I want you to do.
Marisa makes me laugh. She is a copywriting genius. The fact that she can pull in her grandfather to tie him in, to create these stories, makes me think, what else is there to write about? I mean, even just looking around my office now, I have stories for every article in this room, which is a year's worth of content. And so I think sometimes we overthink this process of creating content, which is also in our pitches. Like, if you've ever pitched the media, you know what it feels like to sit down and think of, my gosh, what's the angle? What's the hook? What's the juicy, meaty thing we can sink our teeth into that I know the journalists or the press will love to hear? And I will say there is so much overlap with the work that Marisa does that is also included in the VIP day. So crafting the ultimate story, especially if you're not a creative writer, is tough. It's really tough because when it goes to writing an email pitch or a press release, it has to be short and punchy and succinct, and it has to get to the point. You literally have to put 10 pages worth of content into 1 or 2 paragraphs. It's like word math. And maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's not something you enjoy to do. But Marisa, if you go check out some of her stuff in the show notes, you can learn a little bit more about how she does it. But also, as it pertains to PR, there is a really cool program I have called the VIP Day, which is strategy over breakfast and gets you PR ready by dinner time. So this is strategy, creative storytelling, and it's for you, female entrepreneur, the person who doesn't have necessarily the millions of dollars it costs to invest into an agency to do the work for you, but to actually craft this strategy in place and implement it in place alongside me. So how the VIP day works is you go to wewildwomen.com/VIP day to get some information, and then you book a call. So this discovery call will determine whether or not we're a good fit, but also if it is something that you're ready for. Because what I'm doing is creating this ultimate strategy, which includes pitch angles, media lists, media kit, explanations on how to pitch. I give you everything you need to be successful, and then you take the reins. I've done a handful of these already, and there are a couple spots left for May. So check it out, wewildwomen.com/VIP day, and learn how you can invest into yourself and your business to get you the media coverage that you deserve simply by working with me for one day. wewildwomen.com/VIP day. You're such a creative writer. How can people get this inspiration? Because I know there's a lot of listeners that are just not as creative. They don't like writing. So how do they do this? Because there's like people that don't have their copywriters in their court. And so they need to sit in front of a computer and start writing. What is the process?
Totally. So I promise you, because I've helped over 400 people now inside of the Copy Confidence Society, I promise you that you can do this. You can do this. These are business owners. I'm not teaching. We do have some copywriters in our world in the program, but this is how I've set this up is geared towards, the everyday person. And so a couple of things is remembering that it does not have to, and I'll give you another trick here that's helpful, but some more like the mindset stuff is just like, number one, that it doesn't have to be like perfect. Like we need to start getting those stories kind of out there as we go back to what we talked about, Renee, like how important these like little slice of life moments are and starting to think about where these stories kind of live in your life. Also knowing that copy isn't just written, it's the way that you speak. So there's also some of my people in the society that don't ever end up really writing. Sometimes their emails, you can listen to them. They like speak or they send you, their email sends you to like a Facebook Live that you can go watch the replay. So there's many ways to kind of get across the right way for you to kind of process and do it. But when we think about the story, this is actually from like my actor world. So when I was an actor, there's a famous teacher named Uta Hagen, and she taught a method that's basically, it's called sense memory. And the idea that when you're on stage, you want to recreate a real life moment. So she would give you these exercises of like, hey, when you're waiting for the subway in New York City, wherever you're waiting for the subway, think about what you do. Okay, you step up to the edge, you look to the left to see if it's coming. Maybe you pace, you walk backwards, so that when you're on stage, you could recreate that moment if you needed to. And so the key questions that she's asking you to recreate a moment really is your senses. What did I see? What did I hear? What did I smell? How did I feel? So it's the same thing here. We don't need to tell some like huge Tolstoy level story. This can be a micro moment. And all you need to do is pick two of the senses. And even when you do the crappy first draft, I was going to swear, but the crappy first draft, it does not like that. You won't have this yet. This is when you come back to kind of carve. But the carving, the editing does not need to take long because we're just looking for two senses. So in the example I just gave you, I basically say, it's official. My in-laws have the greatest of all time kitchen. Light cabinets, equal parts brand new. What did I see? Right? Every time I pour my Califia creamer into my Earl Grey tea in that paradise, I think, damn, my in-laws are ballers. How did I feel? What did I hear? I remember asking my mother-in-law, hey, Rachel, how did you even begin to describe this kitchen? So we want to pick, when I'm doing like editing sessions with people, we're looking for two senses. So it could be as simple as I'll never forget I'm just making this up. The rain was falling on the roof. I woke up out of bed, looked at Eric and was like, is the roof caving in, right? Which happened the other night. There was this huge rainstorm in Austin, and that could be the story. That could be the moment. And then we have the transition of like, why am I telling you this? Or when this happened, I thought about you. And then we can move into what the takeaway is or the teachable moment. But we're after like two senses. So like, what did I hear and what did I see? Or how did I feel and what did I smell? That's what we're going for.
I'll remember this one time in San Diego when the rain did fall and we were in this really cute, like beachy Airbnb. And it was a morning and I asked, I don't know how old my oldest was at the time. So it would have been probably 4 years ago. So he would have been like 6-ish. And I go get dressed in your room. And so he goes into his room and he comes out and he's like, there's bugs on my bed. And I'm like, what? Like, this is a clean, pristine place. And I looked on the comforter and I could see a couple ants. But then I pulled the sheets back and there were just ants everywhere, all over the bed. And it was so gross. And so I messaged the Airbnb host and I told them the story. And I go, is this normal? Do you have an ant infestation? Can you send someone over? This is gross. Like, I don't want to stay here. And their reply was, this is not normal to this location. Typically what happens is when it rains, it disturbs the ground for the ants and they try to go and seek shelter somewhere else. And they just happened to find my son's bed. And let me tell you, we were all creeped out for the rest of that trip. And even to this day, sometimes if I see a black dot on the sheet and it's a fluff, I'm like, oh my God, there's ants.
Oh my God, there's ants. I got to like take care of this.
But could you picture it? So I told you the story.
No, I can totally picture it.
I said the heebie-jeebies. So like, then you felt it. That's cool. I love that. I never thought about looking at like the senses as a way to create that emotion, to remember a story, to make someone believe that they were there.
Yeah. And then like by me telling that story about the rain reminds you of a memory that happened to you. And again, now we're creating like engagement with people and connections that foster in some way, right? Because I always say, like, again, going back to what I said earlier, I never have control over if someone like buys from me, but I have control over those 3 R's that you'll remember, you'll rave about, and you'll refer. And that's when people might hit reply and be like, oh my gosh, Marisa, this story reminds me of this time at this Airbnb, right? And creating those kinds of connections with people, especially, I always joke, like in this economy, when, you know, our buyers, our people are like savvier than ever, and they need these multiple touch points to make the right purchasing decision for them. This really goes a long way and can be quite simple as you start practicing it and doing it.
Yes, this reminds me of a time that I emailed a writer for the blog Scary Mommy, which is one of the top mommy parenting blogs. And this writer, Emma, wrote this really cool article about what I do in my house alone for 2 weeks. If my husband and kids and dog weren't there, like what would I do? And I read it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so powerful. And I replied, not to like say anything other than I loved your article and this is what I would do. But it was like really hip and fun and funny. I was like, I'd wear all the fancy clothes I was never able to wear the last 4 years. I would probably cry and listen to Chicago, or I'd mop the floors with my toothbrush listening to Taylor Swift. And there was just something about the way that I replied. She's like, I feel you on this. Like she replied right away. 2 seconds later, I get an email from the editor-in-chief of Scary Mommy asking me if I would be a contributor to their blog. Just because of that.
So cool, Renee.
And as a publicist, being asked to write for a pretty predominant publication is a huge deal. So the story allowed me to share my stories, that connection point, which ended up becoming something I never expected. It was huge.
Yeah.
It was fun.
That's such a great example. It's such a great example. I have like chills from that. That's so good. That's it right there. That's it.
So I'd love to know, what would you do home alone for 2 weeks?
My gosh, what would you know what? I don't think I should be. Okay, I'm a super extrovert, meaning I'm recharged by being around other people. So I don't think like, I joke with people like, I need to be, even if I'm showering, like, come on in. If the curtain's there, like, sit down, talk to me. Like, let's have a conversation. So I don't know if left for you. I think I probably would. I like to put on concerts so I could see myself having like a day where I'm like, I was a huge Toni Braxton fan growing up when I was a kid. So I could see myself just love. So I could see myself like getting in costume and just like singing the entire like Heat album. Like He Wasn't Man Enough for Me. And then doing like the dance moves. And I could see myself the next day doing like singing through the entire like Bridges of Madison County, like musical.
Would you do backyard sessions like Miley Cyrus does, just with no audience, where she sings on the roof of her like pool house or something?
I feel like I'm already doing that. Like my poor husband, like I feel like my husband, that's been 12 years of his life. Cause I always say like on Fridays, like I'm like settled down and then I just would turn on like the JBL speaker and I would just like put on a concert while he's cooking dinner. Cause bless him, he does. You don't, even though I'm Italian, I know everyone out there's like, what? My husband does the cooking. I don't cook. I'm just the entertainment. And I will just like, I feel like I'm putting on my backyard sessions. There's just no one's filming me like mildly.
That you know of.
That I know of. But sometimes I do. I put them on my Instagram stories. So actually I call them like the Friday night like dance parties or Friday night like singing parties. And I'll actually put it on my Instagram stories.
Oh, that's awesome. I need to do that. Yeah. We don't cook in this house. Neither my husband or I enjoy cooking. And so we get fed. But it's not perfect. It's nutritious. And I'm sure that people relate to that and they love the fact that you're sharing that part of your life. They get to know you.
Yeah, when I wasn't doing it for a while, when I was sick last year, because I didn't tell people, I waited until this past December to share with my community that I was going through breast cancer. So there were people that were reaching out like, hey, I haven't been seeing your Friday night, like where you tell us a story about why you love a certain singer and then like play. Because I would be like, okay, when I was a kid, I was listening to Carly Simon, like listening to her sing, like, who was I at 8 years old singing, like, Do the Walls Come Down? Like, who was I? And like, my mother just let me, or I remember my grandmother would be horrified because I loved Madonna and I'd walk around singing Express Yourself. And my grandma was horrified. My grandma was like to my mother, like, what? But my mother would just let me, and I'd walk around the house like, come on, girls. Do you believe in love? Like it was me, like in a slip that my Aunt Connie used to have. Yeah. And I'd wear my Aunt Sharon. She had like these red spike heels that she gifted me that like barely fit me. And I'd walk around the house and sing it. So I'll tell a story like that. And then I'll play the song and kind of go through it. And I had people reaching out like, hey, Marisa, I haven't seen you do that lately. Just those things that bring people to you. Or I use hot rollers in my... Yeah, they like you. Like I use hot rollers in my hair. Again, I'm Italian. So whenever I have hot rollers in my hair, I do this thing called the hot roller hot tip in my Instagram stories. Because I got to wait for them to settle. So what am I going to do? So I go on my Instagram stories and I might share something. And now I call it the hot roller hot tip.
Wow. I love that. Now I'm thinking about getting hot rollers. I remember having like a Caboodles-like kit when I was growing up in the 90s that had like the hot roller things. And now I have it back. When I have a chance to do my hair, I'll actually curl it. But yeah. Okay. I love this. So remind us, what are the 3 R's again?
Oh, that people will remember you, rave about you, and refer you.
And then to always add some sort of sense into your stories. Okay. One last question for you. When I ask you what it means to be a wild woman, what is that to you?
Okay. When I was, I think like 21, I studied abroad in the south of France. And I had an incredible writer named Hetty Jones. She wrote an incredible book about coming up in the 1960s in New York City called How I Became Hetty Jones. She's an incredible poet. And she has this line, and I used to have it. I actually hand painted it behind my bed when I used to live with my brother in New York. And she says, the quote goes like this, she says, women, to women, here's the dilemma, itself the solution. I've always been at the same time woman enough to be moved to tears and man enough to drive my car in any direction. And I've always felt that like has embodied me to be vulnerable and honest, but also to set out on a path that is so different from any other woman in my family and in women in my ancestors. Shift the financial paradigm, the paradigm of like my ancestors in that way. And I always go back to that quote as being, I guess my answer to this question is that quote is what it means to me.
I love it. That's awesome. Okay. So if people are interested in learning more about your offers or to find you online, where can they go?
Yeah. So speaking of Toni Braxton, my Instagram is at mtoni, MTONI. So I always say, please, DM me there. Let me know if there was something that you loved or you heard in a different way, or you're going to try out the Story Stripdown. Let me know how it goes. I will respond to you in the DMs. And also if you want to, learn more about who we are, the Copy Chat Facebook group is a really a truly connected Facebook group. It's a great place to ask your copy questions. When we're launching the Copy Confidence Society, you can learn more about it there. So those are my 2 favorite places to really see the community in action.
I love it. I can't believe you named your Instagram handle after Toni Braxton.
I told you I'm serious. Well, my stage name used to be M. Toni Frado. And Anthony was my father's name. And people would always call me Marisa. And my name is Marisa. So it drove me wild. So I kind of wanted to honor my dad, but I didn't want it to be Tony. And so I was such a huge Toni Braxton fan growing up. So my actor name forever until I left the business was M. Toni Frado.
Wow. I didn't know there were actor names. I needed an actor name. I used to have a bar star name. I remember in college days, I had a fake name. It was Gabrielle because I'm a huge Gabrielle Reese fan. And it was I would go by Gabrielle. I love it.
Oh my God, I love it. Yeah, I have a fake. My Starbucks name is Claire because people always call me Marisa or spell it wrong. Yeah.
I love it.
And I'm British. When I go to Starbucks, I'm British. Claire is British.
Okay. Do you show up with an accent as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I order in a British accent. And my husband's
full character.
Mortified. I told you what this man has put up with for 12 years. Full character.
My God.
Claire is
British.
To
hang out with you for a day on a Friday would be awesome.
On a Friday, Renee, we'll go to Starbucks. You can be Gabrielle. I will be Claire.
Okay, well, now I got to one-up that. I got to have some sort of accent and a really interesting name. I'll think about it. I'll let you know later.
Okay.
Fun times. But thank you so much for joining us today. Absolutely love this conversation.
Oh, thank you for having me, Renee. This has been so much fun. Thank you.
So there you have it. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Into the Wild. To make this girl happy, And to help reach other women who are dreaming of starting their business, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes and everywhere you listen in. Also, if you want to find me in the wild, check me out on Instagram at Renee_Warren. That's RENEE_WARREN. And leaving you with one of my favorite tips of all time: the best advice you could ever receive is from someone who has successfully done it before you. Until next time, ladies, peace out.